Today's Pool Nation product spotlight is the Pentair Bioshield, only from Pentair. Neutralizes harmful bacteria, reduces chlorine, energy efficient. To tell us more about this week's product spotlight is Pentair's own Mikel Ferri, product manager for Pentair, an expert in his field, with suspiciously too few tan lines.
Good morning, guys, and welcome to the Pool Nation Live podcast with myself, your host, Edgar De Jesus. And yes, I am the reigning champion of Marco Polo, along with John, JJ Flawless, the fastest netter in the West, and Zach, the pool boy, Nicholas. And this week we have a special guest, Mikel Ferri from Pentair. He is a product manager for the Bioshield. And I want to welcome everybody to our live podcast where it's all pool talk, and we ain't talking about netting and jetting or splashing and dashing. We're talking about becoming a nation of pool pros. And yes, we will talk about the latest products, trends, and training in the pool industry. Zach, good morning.
Good morning, Edgar. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. We just had a tropical storm Beta pass by, and some parts of Houston got hit pretty hard, but we were fortunate. We didn't get much on our side of town, but I did have one pool that took on the whole bayou, so that's going to be a fun one to get turned back around.
That's crazy. I did see that post. That was pretty darn crazy with it right behind it.
Yeah.
So, John, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Edgar. Just looking forward to this podcast. I want to sit back and listen and get educated.
Absolutely. I myself have done a lot of learning here on these UV systems, so I'm excited to get started. Michael, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Edgar. How are you?
I'm doing great. We're super excited to have you on. So thanks for taking the time to come on. So before we get started today, guys, I want to thank our sponsors for this podcast, the Ultimate Pool Tools and Pool Invoice. We want to thank them for their support. We also want to thank Pentair for joining us today. And guys, for you guys that just tuned in, today we have Mikel Ferri joining us. And we're going to talk about the UV and Pentair's Bioshield. And we're going to do a deep dive into some great learning, guys. So Michael, I want to thank you again for being on the live and taking the time to talk to us about the Bioshield. It's really getting popular out there, and I see a lot of guys on social media talking about it. I did my first install about a month ago and was amazed how easy it was to install and how well it's working. So before we start to talk about the Bioshield, I want the listeners to get to know a little bit about you, your background. Maybe you could tell us about yourself and how you became the product manager for the Bioshield.
Yeah. So right out of school, I graduated in electrical engineering, and right out of school, I worked for a commercial pool company that was up in Chicago or near Chicago, just south of it. And, we basically did mostly automation controllers, controlling ORP and pH and doing some filtration and things like that. And I was product manager for the controllers. And then as time went on, they had actually they had a big job going on at Disney where they're going to put in some controllers, and they asked me to be the service supervisor down here in Florida. So I moved down to Florida and took on that project for a little while, and then moved on within the company to the industrial side where I worked in, like wastewater treatment plants, nuclear power plants, all different types of applications, but I was still in water. I was just programming PLCs for water reclamation for companies. And then, that lasted for, I don't know, I think I was in it for about 5 years. There was an opening with Pentair on product management. And so I thought I'd get back into it. And, I really enjoyed the pool side of it. So I applied with Pentair and became product manager. And Pentair had bought a company that we now have the UV, that was a UV company. I had a lot of experience with UV because I would do installs, but there was mostly industrial side, but I did have experience. So when they brought me on, they asked me to kind of champion the UV side and get everybody up to speed, how UV works and do training and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I ended up with the product management role of the UV side at Pentair.
That's great. It's pretty much your whole lifetime in the water side of the industry. So,
yep, definitely.
Maybe you could tell us, so how does Bioshield get started in the UV? Maybe you can give us a little background. So what made Pentair think and decide to bring that technology into the swimming pool industry?
Well, Pentair, we all know that Pentair has everything to do with water. Well, in 2013, there was a idea, or they wanted to expand, and they wanted to go into aquaculture. Now, aquaculture is mostly just as fish farming. For the most part, that's where they wanted to be, because they thought, the idea was that's just going to get more popular as, people need to, feed the population and stuff like that. So the UV that they brought on did aquaculture, but it also did some other things. So the Bioshield, as we know it, was mostly laboratory use. So people who had fish in their laboratories or koi ponds and, kind of smaller scale applications. And the nice thing about using UV aquaculture that I don't think, that we don't really see in the pool side is that in aquaculture or koi ponds or whatever, when that UV goes out, you notice it. That UV, if it doesn't have a UV, you notice that pond does not have a UV because it gets pretty murky. And
right.
Once you put a UV on there, all of a sudden it starts to clear up. So, you really see the difference that a UV makes on a pond versus, a pool. Is sometimes it's difficult to see, visually to see it, what's going on. But so that's Pentair basically got into the Bioshield, or got into the pool side because when they bought this, this UV system, they thought, man, it seems like it's popular with pools. Let's see if we can make something for pool.
No, that makes sense. Absolute sense. So they buy this company, they see the potential for the UV into the swimming pool industry. And so what changes then did they have to make to that product to bring it into the swimming pool industry?
The aquaculture side, or, DIY koi ponds and stuff like that, they go with very low pressure. So you don't have to, that UV doesn't really have to, there's not a lot of pressure in a line. So the UV doesn't have to have, the seals don't have to be at a rating that need to be in a pool. So that's one of the things we changed was all the seals, a higher rating, because pools sometimes, sometimes new install, you might let it sit there at 50 PSI until an inspector comes out. So, we had to change all those seals and everything that had to do with, keeping water out of the outside of the vessel or even in the quart sleeve.
Gotcha. So let's do this, guys, because I think this part is important. So before we go into further detail, because I'm going to start asking you questions about the UV itself and Bioshield. So one of the things that I want to talk about really quick, so that I think it's important for us to touch on it, and I want to do it before we get into the details. This way our listeners can the big difference and see where the Bioshield is going to have the greatest impact. So I want to talk about sanitation and oxidation. And so, guys, when we're talking water chemistry, the first thing that Wayne from Taylor Technologies taught me was sanitation and oxidation and the differences. And so we know that sanitation and oxidation are not the same thing, okay? So sanitation is going to be the destruction of potentially harmful microorganisms such as bacteria and algae, and oxidation is going to be destruction and the removal of contaminants such as, bather waste, pool, personal care products, pollen, dust, dirt. And it could be things that goes through your body. And guys, yes, the urine and the fecal matter, or it comes off of your body. So the skins, the hair, the oil, sunblock, leaves, anything of an organic nature. Okay. So I wanted to cover that really quickly because you're going to see where the Bioshield is going to play the biggest part within your water chemistry. So I want you guys to remember sanitation and oxidation because we're going to talk a lot about the oxidation side. With that said, guys, all right, let's dive in and let's really kind of get into the UV and the Bioshield. So, Michael, I'm going to ask you some questions that kind of for you might seem very, simple, that kind of stuff, but I really want the listeners to really learn everything about UV with the goal to be able to educate the customers. So the first question that I would have is, what is ultraviolet? What is UV?
Well, UV, we know it comes from the sun, but ultraviolet has a spectrum of light, and it actually has three different regions of that scale. There's UVA, UVB, and UVC. UV, as in for what we're using it for, it's using UVC. Now, UVC is pretty harmful to people, but luckily the ozone layer completely filters out UVC before it gets to Earth. So we're never exposed to it. So that UVC, we use that for disinfection. It's very good at, basically what it does is it messes with the bacteria that's in the water. Typically what I don't say is, I don't say it kills the bacteria, because it's more like sterilizing it than killing it. So that's the only distinction I kind of make. So when someone says, well, how does UV kill anything? It's like, well, it doesn't really kill it. It just sterilizes it, really.
So how does that ultraviolet light work? What does it do to that bacteria?
Yeah. So how it works is it actually gets inside the DNA of the bacteria, and it splits the DNA so it can't replicate. So the bacteria, and if it tries to replicate, it actually will die. So it's just keeping it from, growing. Just like if you see it, you see a spot in your pool and you're like, yeah, I'll get it later. And you come back later and it's bigger. It's that spot replicating.
Uh-huh.
So what the UV does is it just ruins the DNA so it doesn't replicate inside the pool.
That's amazing. I totally did not know that's what it does, that it grabs the DNA and damages that DNA, and that if it replicates, it dies. And I think in our industry, we're just so used to you throw something in and it kills it, but pretty interesting. So where did the UV sanitizers get their start?
Well, UV in general actually started in the 1800s. It was mostly for air, because they were dealing with a lot of diseases, like measles and tuberculosis and things like that. So they were using UV to sterilize air. And it wasn't until later on, mostly in Europe, that beginning 1900s, that UV was used in water. It started out as in water treatment, like wastewater and stuff like that, and drinking water. And then as that population grew, or the popularity grew, then it, said, well, let's see what other things we can sterilize, whether that was drinking water or swimming pools. And in the beginning, there was, UV was making its popularity, and it was using a certain type of lamp. It was using a medium pressure lamp. Now, when I say pressure, I'm not referring to the pressure of the water. I'm referring to the gases inside that lamp. So it was a medium pressure lamp. Medium pressure comes in a smaller package, so you can put it in smaller areas. The bad thing about it is it gets very hot. So as time went on, the UV technology advanced, and then they developed a low pressure lamp. So the low pressure lamp is the lamp that we use in the Bioshield. Medium pressure lamps typically are used chlorine destruction applications, where there are places that, basically it's, when I did industrial stuff, we went to an place made orange juice, and the water, they would treat the water with chlorine, and then they would chlorine destruct it with carbon and a medium pressure UV. And the reason that medium pressure UV kills chlorine is because it hits that wavelength that it needs to kill chlorine. And also because of the heat of medium pressure, it gets rid of chlorine just thermally, just because it gets so hot. So the low pressure lamps that we have, the advantage of the low pressure, it doesn't get so hot. And then also the difference is it is a longer lamp. So medium pressure comes in a smaller package, but a low pressure is less heat, but it's a longer lamp.
And so that low pressure lamp is the one that doesn't kill the chlorine, which is the one that obviously you guys use in your Bioshield.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So why is an ultraviolet, a UV, a pool sanitizer?
So what it basically, like I talked about before, how it gets rid of the DNA or messes with the DNA of the bacteria. But it's not just bacteria, but there's also viruses. We had kind of, in the pool industry, we know of a few viruses that are out there that are kind of pesky, that are maybe a little more chlorine resistant than usual. So that's where the UV comes into play. It's not oxidizing it. It's just making the water cleaner, but it's not doing it in the same way as chlorine would. But it's more effective than chlorine because it has, it's like I said, UVC is very harmful to people. It's just as harmful to bacteria.
So how effective is that disinfection?
The disinfection is it really depends on how small that vessel is. So you could have UV and just, you could throw, obviously, you throw, not advised, but if the lamp goes in water, depending, obviously the most disinfection that's going to happen is going to be closest to the lamp. And so that's why you see vessels that are typically, for a single lamp, you see them a little smaller because you want the water to be channeled right by that lamp, and that's where you get the most disinfection. So, and really when it comes to how effective it is, so when NSF does, it does its measurements on how good your UV is, it uses a log, what they call 3 log, 2 log, 1 log. You might see it in, if you read about other UV systems, you might see that they say they have a 3 log removal. Basically what that means is that 99.9% of the bacteria that goes through that UV gets hit with UVC and gets messed with. So the DNA changes of that bacteria. So 99.9% effective, basically. There's been, and there are things that affect that. The flow rate affects your removal. What you have in your water affects how good the efficiency is. So the common perception of, water and how good it is how clean it is or how clear it is. Clarity of water doesn't necessarily mean that, it's really good for UV. So like if you have iron in your water, iron absorbs UV. So if you had a lot of iron in your water, it's going to absorb a lot of that UV. And so you won't get as much efficiency out of it. So that's really the only metal that we would see in water that would cause issues with UV. So effectiveness is basically, NSF, and this is an NSF unit, and a lot of the units out there are NSF. They use a 3 log, so a 99.9% removal, or not removal, but reduction as bacteria goes by.
That's another interesting one right there with the iron. I did not know that would affect that. So definitely, guys out there, you need to make sure that and I say this all the time, is you really need to test those metals and keep that within reason. So if I have a UV, do I need to use another form of sanitizer? I could put the UV Bioshield in and that's it. I'm done. I'm great.
So you do need chlorine in your pool in addition to the UV. It's only because, we've all seen it, where we go to a pool, somebody asks for, they want some pool service, or you just notice it, that there's just one spot in that pool that seems to be just a trouble area. And that's because, the water doesn't circulate everywhere, or it doesn't circulate as well. So that part of the water, that's really not going to make it through the UV much. But that's why you need chlorine. So chlorine is pervasive throughout the whole pool. And that's why you need, an oxidizer to get around the whole pool. And then the UV is just there for anything that goes through the UV.
So obviously this is doing the oxidizing, what are some of the other things that you would recommend to use it in tandem with? Well,
it's very popular. We have the iChlor or the IntelliChlor units. They're salt systems. That's a pretty regular application or setup that we see, that, they just have the salt system going and they have the UV going. Typically what the install that we say is that the UV should be before the salt cell, but after the filter. The reason that we say after the filter, because we want all those impurities and stuff like that out of that water before it goes to the UV. And then before the salt cell, because we just, it could go before or after the salt cell, but we always say before, just so sanitize something before it gets to the salt cell. So it can go either before or after, but we normally say, before.
So one thing I wanted to ask is when we talk about using a Bioshield with other Pentair products like the IntelliChlor, or even some of the automation systems, is that simply for on-off control through the automation system, or are there any other functions that we want to be aware of when we're doing this?
Yeah, it's mostly, you're right. It's mostly just on-off control. There has been in the past, there has been some UV units that actually did a light intensity. They would, dim it if the flow rate would change. That didn't work out so well. We don't really see those UV units around anymore. But yes, it's mostly just an on-off control. Now the Bioshield also comes with a flow switch. So you can put a flow switch in line in the plumbing, and that will actually turn on and off the ballast. There's a connection to the ballast with that flow switch, and so that if you don't have automation to turn it on and off, you definitely can use that flow switch to do that too.
So how does the UV reduce the need for chlorine?
So since it's doing its job with stopping the bacteria from replicating, and as time goes on, like when you first put it in the UV, it's gonna take a little while before all that bacteria finally makes it through. The DNA gets messed up, and then it just goes away. As time goes on, as that UV keeps doing that and reducing that bacteria, that allows the chlorine to not use as much, because you think about your pool is like there's good guys and bad guys. You have the bad guys entering the pool, and once the bad guys enter the pool, well, now you got to increase your strength of the good guys. And then after they win, then they decrease their strength. And you got this going up and down, this ppm change of chlorine. Well, what UV does when you do have those loads, or even during times of peace, I guess you could say, the UV just maintains the status quo, maintains those bad guys from replicating, and allows the chlorine to just kind of stay, at a certain level, at 1 ppm, instead of fluctuating all the time to trying to beat, all the things that are getting into your pool.
Hey guys, let's take a minute to hear a word from our sponsors. And when we come back, Edgar, I want to ask you about some of the harder to kill bacteria.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Hyper Pole from Ultimate Pool Tools is a pool care pole designed by pool professionals for pool professionals, featuring precision-crafted carbon fiber and stainless steel construction. Go to ultimatepooltools.com or Instagram at Ultimate Pool Tools. Introducing Pool Invoice. Pool Invoice is pool billing software that was created specifically for the pool service and repair industry. It was developed for our industry and only our industry. Pool Invoice was built with recurring billing in mind. You can print, email, text invoices, or even send via WhatsApp. You can add reoccurring or yearly charges, accept credits, and set up autopay. You can even see when customers have seen the invoice. It even has a customer portal where they can log in and see, print, and pay invoices. It has all of your customers' information on one page, so you don't need to search through hundreds of invoices looking for the one you need. Just go to the customer's profile, and it's all at your fingertips. It's currently in beta phase, so anyone can use it for free. Just go to poolinvoice.com and request an invitation at the bottom of the page. Pool Invoice was made for you.
So I wanted to ask, if we're talking about some of the things that it is killing, can you give us some examples of the stronger things that it is killing that are more resistant to chlorine?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that there's certain things that are going to be more resistant to the chlorine. And so some of those, and we kind of hear this one all the time in our industry and stuff like that, the crypto and stuff, but there's other things like the Giardia. And that's basically a microscopic parasite that causes severe intestinal discomfort. And so that one's found on surfaces or in soil. It's found in food, water that has been contaminated with feces or poops from infected humans or animals. And what happens is it's protected by an outer shell that allows it to survive outside of the body for long periods of time. And it makes it tolerant to that chlorine disinfection. So while the parasite can be spread in different ways, drinking water and recreational water is the most common one for that one. And then we have another one, which hear all the time, which is the E. coli bacteria, which can cause a urinary tract infections, respiratory illnesses, and other issues. And out of those, there's like 6 pathotypes that are associated with diarrhea and collective areas that are affected with that. So another one would be, like the Pseudomonas, and those can create infections in the bodies under certain circumstances. And the same thing there's many different types of this bacteria. So, only some of those can survive and cause the infection, but those are ones that they tend to live and breed in water. So that's kind of why we see them in those recreationals. So there's some of them that you can see that become, more resistant to chlorine. And we hear about some of those in our industry, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's why it's important that we need to always look at our water chemistry and look at, the sanitation and oxidation and really see where we're going to have the biggest impact to kill those. So those are just, an example of some of the ones that are more resistant to chlorine. Michael, what is the runtime suggested for a UV on, let's say, like a 10,000 gallon pool?
Well, it really depends on your turnover rate. I've run mine 8 hours a day. Some people run it maybe 10 hours or 12 hours a day or 6 hours. I make sure that the flow rate is such that that I get all of my pool, and if a little more, through the system in that time period. So if you took your 10,000 hours or 10,000 gallons, you said, okay, so what would be my flow rate for that if I run it for 8 hours? So you do, you're going to figure out what your gallons per minute is. So you would divide 10,000 by 8, and then you would divide it by 60, and you'd come up with 20.8 gallons per minute. So you could use the smaller one, the smaller Bioshield, which is a the 50 watt 522635 to run that pool. Now, the thing is that if you have a variable speed pump, and let's say out of that 8 hours, there's the first 2 hours you're running at a low speed, and the last 2 hours you're running at a low speed. And it's only the middle 4 that you're running at a higher speed. So it's no longer 20.8 gallons per minute. It's whatever that high speed was at that 4 hours. So, you look at pump curves and you figure out what that gallons per minute is, and then you can get a UV to size it for that maximum flow rate for that pump. What some installers do is if they do put in a variable speed pump, they rate it for whatever the highest speed that thing can go. So even if the customer goes and ramps that pump up, it's not exceeding the flow rate for that UV unit.
So I just want to kind of backtrack a little bit here. So basically for our listeners out there, so can these UVs run with any pump speed, or do we need to make sure that the water is not going to go too fast or too slow to do its job?
Each of the UV units have their maximum flow rate. Take the smallest one, 25 gallons a minute. 25 gallons a minute gives you a UV dose that will inactivate everything that you want to inactivate. Okay, so if you run higher than that, if water goes by faster, that means water has less time with the UV. That means your disinfection will actually go down if you go higher than that speed. So the lower the speed, the better. More interaction with water and UV, the better your inactivation is.
Makes total sense. So it really does have that. But obviously at that slower rate, all that's going to go through the UV, and it's going to have time to really kind of take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you know when a UV system's no longer working? So if I'm a pool guy, and I think one of the things that happens is we walk into backyards and we're kind of seeing these units in there. We don't know anything about them. Mm-hmm. So if I walk in, I don't have a lot of experience. Customer says, hey, can you take a look at my UV system? And I walk into that backyard, how do I know if it's working or not? Or how do I know it needs to be replaced? How am I able to tell that?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Typically, UV units, see the light on, you know that the UV is working. The caveat to that is you have to know when the lamp was actually put on, so there is a runtime, there is a number of hours. So the lamp has a runtime hours of 9,000 hours, which is like a year and 3 months. For most pools, or for some pools that maybe have a 6 to 7 month period, that lamp could last 2 years. So, or probably will last 2 years. So typically, if you go into a application and you see the UV and you don't know whether it's on or not, you look at the viewports on either side of the UV unit, see if the lamp is on. Sometimes it might be a little difficult because it's sunny out and you have to put your hand over the viewport to see anything. That tells you UV is working. Everything's fine. Now, I will say that you still need to know the number of hours because the lamp will still fire. It will still turn on after that number of hours. So you could go to this application and see that the lamp is still on. You're like, oh, that's cool. It's working. Like, yeah, I got that lamp like 4 years ago. Like, well, it's on, but it's not really working for you.
So
go ahead, Zach.
I would look at that and I would say one thing that maybe we should do when we're picking up a new pool and we come on a Bioshield and we don't know how long that lamp has been in use. And if the customer doesn't have that information, it might be good practice to just at that point go ahead and sell them on a new bulb and just get a fresh bulb in there so that when we take over the pool, we know exactly where we're starting with that Bioshield.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a smart move. So if I have this Bioshield and I've kind of heard obviously of the lamp or the ballast, is there a way to be able to tell whether it's the lamp or the ballast that's bad?
You can tell with the lamp because it does the same thing as a light bulb would in your house. It actually darkens. So, you see that you look in the viewport, you don't see the lamp on. And, if you take the lamp out and you see the darkening around the coils at the end of the lamp, you know that it's the lamp. If it looks fine, looks, really good. The other thing is now you think, well, maybe it's the ballast. The unfortunate thing about ballasts is they don't operate like regular transformers. You would see a transformer and you would say, okay, well, I can definitely check the voltage that's coming out of that and I can tell whether it's good or bad. A ballast, you can't necessarily do that. There is voltage that's coming out of it and it can be checked. It has to be with a specific meter that has an RMS on it. Now you can buy that at Home Depot. You can buy them at Lowe's. They're probably the mid to higher range meter, but it actually says so root mean square, so RMS meter. What that does, the reason that you have to buy one of those meters is because the ballast, the voltage that's coming out of that has actually got a frequency to it. What a RMS meter does is it looks at that frequency and it smooths and it counts it and it gives a constant reading. If you use a regular meter, you might see nothing because it doesn't know what to do, or it jumps all over the place and it doesn't know how to calculate it. So you can check the meter or you can check the ballast to see if there's voltage there, but that's not the end all be all. That doesn't guarantee you that the ballast is good. So that's what I mean by ballasts are tricky. So typically if the ballast is dead, you won't see any voltage. You'll see nothing. That tells you right away, hey, it's my ballast. If there's voltage there and the lamp still isn't firing, it could be that the ballast just isn't giving enough amps. So crappy part about it is that, the ballast, if you plug it into a new lamp, you could see whether it's the lamp or the ballast.
Correct.
So you got to walk around with a lamp. Now, the nice thing is that the 4 units that we have, 3 of those units all use the same ballast. The lower 3 use the same ballast. So you could walk around with just one lamp. You don't have to walk around with all 3 lamps. You can just walk around with one lamp and use that as your tester.
Gotcha. That's great. At least it's just one that you're kind of troubleshooting from there. So on the bulb itself, how often should you replace it? So is there something that Pentair recommends every certain amount of hours that you just replace it?
Yeah, it's 9,000 hours. You kind of have to watch it. You have to know how often has this person, as the customer, been running their pool. I think a lot of the Pentair people out there with the service, they end up just replacing it every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
Yeah, they just replace it every 2 years because, you're going to drive yourself nuts trying to figure out all the hours. You just got so many customers out there. How can you keep track of that? That's probably not going to happen. So they just go and replace it every 2 years and they're good with that.
That makes sense. About every 2 years. So. Mm-hmm. So, Michael, I think one of the things that we want to make sure we do is we give the tools to the pool guys out there talking to the customers on selling the Bioshield. So they're learning about the Bioshield, how all the UV works, trying to ask you and kind of get through all that. So I want to ask you, what do you think is the best way to present this product to a customer? So maybe what are some of those points that they can use to be successful at talking about the Bioshield?
Yeah, the Bioshield right now, what we're seeing with, chlorine and the prices, it's definitely going to save on chemical usage. And depending on what they have, if they have both chlorine and pH, it'll save on both actually. Because if you think about it, you have the UV that's preventing more chlorine going into the pool. Well, then if you add more chlorine to the pool, your pH is going to go up. That means you're going to feed more acid. So actually you would save on both chemicals. Not everybody has acid and not everybody's monitoring it with a controller, but when it comes to just the chlorine side, so the cell that's working to keep chlorine in the pool, if you have it at 100% all the time, you put it in a UV unit, you can put it down to less than that. You can put it down to 70% depending on what the application of your pool is, but it's going to save on those chemical costs, and that's going to definitely make a big difference in your overall year expense for that pool. And also, what the UV does is it's an extra layer of protection. As the year goes on, the pools get warmer, and as the pools get warmer, the chlorine is going to be working overtime. Because the water in general is it's going to be, the chlorine is going to be gassing off because the water's warm. You're getting up to, 88 degrees or 90 degrees in some pools, so then that UV is there. That's not gassing off. I mean, you're still the water's still going through that vessel. It's going to still have that protection there. Even if your chlorine is dissipating faster, you're still going to have that extra layer of protection. And then the sanitizing part, and that is that what you were hitting on before were those chlorine resistant viruses and stuff like that. That's where UV is really, really the most important, because, as people are staying home nowadays, you might have more pool parties. You might have people coming over, people that didn't normally get in your pool. It's nice to know that, hey, I got this UV here, and maybe not everybody does their paperwork right. You have that UV for that extra level of sanitation for your pool.
So, John, Zach, excuse me. So, I'm looking at this, and obviously we talk water chemistry. And so, Zach, you have a full-blown company, and so do John. So, if you look at it from your standpoint, what would be maybe your pitch to the customer with regards to selling that UV?
So for me, the way I would look at it is, as mentioned, like everyone wants to, they want a healthier pool. You talk to customers, they want less chemicals in the water and things like that. So for us, the way I would look at it is coupling it with that sanitizer system so that we could reduce those other products that we're putting in the pool, in turn, creating, healthier water. And then, I think a lot of us tend to overlook the fact of those chlorine-resistant organisms that are in the water because, as mentioned before, the pool can look clear, it can look clean, but it doesn't mean that it's clean or safe to swim in, and it's just an extra layer of protection. And, we do have a higher bather load this year as everyone's staying home. And so that safe aspect of it, I think, is a huge point that we need to be touching on when we're talking to our customers because again, customers don't really understand that clear water doesn't mean it's, safe or clean.
John, what about you?
I kind of want to touch on what Zach said too.
Uh-huh.
We need to, when we speak about it to our customers, we say, hey, look, we need to embrace new technology. The days of just, bombing a pool with chlorine or throwing tabs into a pool and sanitizing and saying chlorine is going to do everything you need to do is kind of the days of the past, where we have technology like we've spoken on ozone or UV, especially anything we can put into the pool that's going to help make our water safer, I think is a home run. And if we portray it to our customers and our clients and let them know, hey, because the number one thing most of us get is, hey, are you going to be adding chemicals into the pool? Or, I'm allergic to chemicals, or, it's like taboo. So being able to tell them, hey, I can provide a safer, fresher, cleaner water for you and not use harsher chemicals seems to work with us when we sell UVs to our customers. And then to explain to them, hey, look, what the process is, what you need to, how simple it is actually to put it in, and being able to reduce like the chlorine usage, I think is just the number one selling key, and Zach nailed a point too. There's a lot of strains of viruses or bacteria that's become immune to chlorine, and having something in the water, having something else there, being able to support chlorine makes it that much more effective.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are all great solid points on that. And it's true. I mean, John, the customers are getting, our equipment's getting more sophisticated, and so are our customers, and demanding some of that. And to me, I look at it and I think it's a great layer of protection. It's going to help me too, because it's going to do its job, and I can worry more about the sanitation side. And I know it's attacking that other side. So
well, for sure, because how many times we go into a pool and, pool's out of chlorine and there's nothing in there disinfecting, or there's nothing in there working to help, keep the pool safe, where you have a crutch, where you have something like UV, or you have something like ozone, or different methods so that you can keep the water safe in between visits. It's a no-brainer.
I agree. So, Michael, one more question. So what's the warranty on the BioShield?
The warranty on the BioShield is 2 years. Now, it kind of depends. I mean, sometimes I think there's I can't remember if they're doing it this year, but previous years they had where you bundled it with something else, you could actually get a little higher warranty on it. But for UV all by itself, it's 2 years.
2 years. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the guys out there want to see any videos or any of that on the BioShield. Do you guys have anything available?
Well, yeah. Well, Pentair doesn't have any videos per se, but there are actually other installers that have posted things online. You have to type in, go to YouTube and type in Pentair Bioshield, because if you type in just Bioshield, other things come up, and I think there's other products called Bioshield, then that'll get confusing. But yeah, Pentair Bioshield.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask too, the Bioshield is a trade grade product, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's a trade grade product. And that basically what that means is it just goes to builders. They sell it mostly to builders for new builds. Now, I think they're opening that up. They're planning on opening it up to more, but right now it is a trade grade product.
And so we're not having to compete with internet when we're trying to sell one of these to our customers, which I think is a huge deal. That is a huge advantage to us, and I'm really appreciative of trade grade products.
Yeah, that was always you go out there and you can look at some of the products out there that are on the internet, and I mean, you're chasing pricing all the time. You can't escape just always either being the highest one or just missing out on so many other opportunities because of the internet.
So, Michael, I know I took your time asking you a lot of little breakdown questions because I want the guys to really kind of, get the feel for everything about the UV. So I've taken a lot of time, and I'm sure there's going to things that I have not thought about and that we should focus on talking about for the pool guys. So I'm basically going to kind of give you the mic and maybe some of the things that, that I didn't ask that maybe you think we should talk about.
Yeah, I would say for installation, there's been some, we have recommendations, but, I've seen installations that haven't been done correctly, and they experience some issues. And, one of the major installation is the orientation. So if you're putting it in a horizontal position, the ports should be up, facing the sky. And that's because so air can get out, because you're in the horizontal position. Sometimes I've seen them where the ports were down. And what happens is over time, pool gets air, whether they're cleaning a pump basket or something like that, and it doesn't. They don't purge out the air. What you can get is a line of air down the middle of that UV unit, and air heats up more than water does. And so with some of the places like Arizona and stuff like that, you get degradation because there's nothing cooling that area. So ports up, in horizontal. You can do it in vertical. Obviously, it doesn't matter. Vertical. The only thing with the vertical is that you do have that air purge at the top. So you purge out the air just like you would with a filter, cartridge filter or something like that. You don't have to do it every time that you start up the system. Like if the pump turns off at night and then turns back on, you don't have to go out there and purge it, but you just purge it like you would a filter. And then I would say I had touched a little bit about the ballast having that flow switch. It's, so that flow switch, what it will do when it turns it off immediately. But when it turns it on, it has a delay. There's a 25-second delay in the initial fire up of that lamp, because that just keeps from, if that flow switch is bouncing, so it has to, that flow switch has to be on for 25 seconds for that lamp to turn on. So you might, you're like, hey, I got flow. Why is my lamp not turn on? Well, you just got to wait 25 seconds and it'll turn on. And then we had talked about, I was going to hit on it, is lamp handling. When you have lamps and you're taking them out, it's always good to not touch them with your hands, because the oils from your hands, they get on those lamps and they create a hot spot, and that lamp might prematurely die. So that would be one failure point of that lamp, is that if it was handled and it did prematurely die, that could be the reason. Another reason that a lamp would prematurely die is if water did get inside the quartz sleeve. Basically, what it does is it cools the lamp, not allowing it to totally fire up, and the lamp works really hard and it burns itself out. A bypass. Now, the bypass, not everybody puts in a bypass, and which is fine. Some people do, some people don't. The bypass really is there to turn off the system, or to have another avenue for the water to go when maybe they're doing maintenance on the UV unit, or they want to keep it running. So they just turn off the UV unit, they change out the lamp in the quartz sleeve, and then they put the lamp in the quartz sleeve in, and then they turn on, where it's going. So that's mostly the reason. The other reason could be that they're running the water through the bypass. I don't really advise that, because you really want all the water to go through that UV unit to get the most effective, sterilization. And I would say the last point is oddly enough, being in Florida, we don't see it much, but winterization. So winterizing the UV unit, we do have a drain port at the bottom. So you can open up the drain port, let all the water out. You really should, maybe take it off the unions and put it on its side and let some of the water fully drain out. I know it's like, well, why do you have a drain plug if you have to still do that? If you're in a place where it freezes, that would be your best practice to really get all that water out of there. Because what happens is the water can freeze and then it expands, and then it might break something inside. But for places that just winterize or just want to, just stop the pool, you can just open up the drain port and just let the water drain out. And you don't have to do anything if you're not in risk of freezing. I think that's pretty much the issues I wanted to kind of touch on.
Guys, let's take a minute to hear from one of our sponsors, Zach, John. When I come back, I want to kind of get your thoughts. So let's just take a second there, guys, and we'll be right back.
The sound of you continually pitching pool care poles into the trash. The sound of you using an Ultimate Pool Tools carbon fiber pool care pole for years to come. Go to ultimatepooltools.com or Instagram at ultimatepooltools.
All right, guys. So, Zach, obviously we've kind of been talking about this UV. What's your final thoughts on these UV systems?
So first off, the service tech side of me loves the idea of creating healthier water by using a Bioshield UV and running lower chlorine levels and hopefully bringing down overall chemical use. The business side of me really looks at the Bioshield as a way to achieve more stable chemistry. If we are constantly eliminating contaminants that are using up some of our chlorine, hopefully we would be able to see less drop-offs of chlorine when using trichlor tabs. And in my mind, more stable chemistry is going to result in more consistent results, which in turn is going to result in higher customer satisfaction. And more stable chemistry with lower chemical use will lower the cost of servicing a pool. And what we have to keep in mind is that even if you can lower your cost of each service by $2 a visit, that adds up. For someone that's servicing 50 pools a month, based off 4 visits that month, you're saving about $400 a month or close to $4,800 a year. And for some of these larger companies that have 200 or more pools, with 200 pools, that comes out to be about $19,000 a year. So just a minor savings in chemical use can add up big. And as we discussed previously, the pool boys, we're really making a push towards installing more salt systems. And if we could take it a step further by coupling it with a Bioshield UV, we could really increase the consistency of our pools and really lower our costs. And the result of that is, like I said, increased customer satisfaction and increased profitability.
This is why I love you, Zach. You always have that business aspect to it, and you're always kind of focusing on that side. I hadn't even run numbers on it, but that's just mind-boggling to me. 19 grand, if you look at it for 200 pools, just by doing that $2 savings, that's freaking huge. John, what about you?
I kind of touched on it a little bit, but as far as like UV, any thriving business or successful business needs to be able to look at new technology and embrace it and change, and this is one of them. We can either choose to do the ways of the past and the ways of the old and continue doing what we're doing and be okay with it, or we can see some of these newer technologies now that are afforded to us that we can bring into our residential pools, and we can step up and be a little bit better than the next guy, be ahead of the curve or ahead of the game. There's no downfall whatsoever, adding a system like UV into a pool. It's a no-brainer. And I know I keep saying that, but we need to look at these things and say, hey, look, what can we do or what can we add into our pools that'll make our jobs easier, make our customers happier, and make my business more successful and more profitable down the road. Zach touched on a great point. Even if you're just saving a little bit of chlorine every single week, or you're saving a lot of chlorine, or saving acid, or whatever you're adding into the pool. But most importantly, some of the things we find hard to monetize or to put a dollar amount to is customer satisfaction, right? Because if a customer's happy and they're happy with the quality of the pool and your service, that pays dividends. You can't really put a number on. So we can say we're saving $15,000 or $20,000 in chlorine, which is amazing on our bottom line. But how much money are we saving, or how much money are we making down the road because we have a customer now that we might have only had for 2 years, and now these customers are lasting 5, 10, 15 years. Instead, this customer that didn't recommend you now is recommending you to 3, 4, 5 people because they understand and appreciate what you're doing for them and the quality of their pool or the quality of their water, because everybody else they've had in the past or any other pool they've had in the past, they weren't given this opportunity, or they didn't see the benefits of it because nobody explained it to them and no one asked them about it. So I look at it that way. And I urge everybody to when you're doing a pool, don't just do the bare minimum. I mean, look and see what you can add and what you can put into your pool or what you can offer your customers so that it makes your job easier, it makes them happier, and makes you more profitable.
Guys, I'm in complete agreement with both of you, and there's a great points on both sides. And guys, I think the way that I see this is, I remember when salt systems started to come out and everybody was very nervous, and you'd walk in and nobody knew how to manage a salt system or test it or clean the salt cells. And so eventually you keep going to pools and seeing more, and you start playing with them a little bit more, and you start playing with them a little bit more. And then you're like, man, this is a piece of cake. I got this down. I don't know why I didn't focus on it more. I really see this Bioshield in that same kind of stage. I think the benefits of it are amazing, right? It's just from the safety side of it. I look at it in the oxidation and killing a lot of these bacteria is great. But I see it kind of like that salt system. And as the guys get more comfortable with it, I think they're going to get more comfortable to be able to talk about the product and do that sales pitch to the customer. And in turn, do both of what you're saying is, one, bring safety to the customer, but then two, bring a saving side to it as well. So I think it's a great product, and I think it'll eventually be pretty much like a salt system that everybody's just kind of comfortable with dealing with them. So Michael, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast to talk about the Bioshield. Definitely learned a lot. And I think the guys out there are excited about it, and they're definitely going to get more comfortable with it and incorporate it into their pool. So I want to thank you for your time.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man.
So we really appreciate it. Guys, our time is up. So we will catch everybody next week. And next week, guys, we're talking everything about Cal Hypo. And there is a tab that is available now that is skimmer friendly on the Cal Hypo. So we're going to talk about that. And we're going to go through the ABCs on that Cal Hypo. So we'll talk next week, guys. Have a great one.
See ya.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Pool Nation podcast. You can listen to us live every Friday here at 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central, and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find us at Pool Nation or poolnationpodcast.com or Instagram at pool.nation.